Okay, good evening to everybody. Good morning to Australia. We continue tonight with Professor Mr. John Hatzopoulos, our lesson in Hellenic Education. Mr. Hatzopoulos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, coordinator. And let me see my transparency. Okay. Do you see this?
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Go on.
Welcome to the Hellenic Education lecture number 4. The previous lessons are on the YouTube, and here are the addresses. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Today, we are going to cover the internal and external balance with mathematics and statistics. And here are the topics we are going to try to cover tonight. In the laboratory, Eleni has prepared the literature part, which is the Metamorphosis of Franz Kafka. For a while, I will repeat some things I covered in the last lecture. That's about the quantification of the mind parameters, like anger, desire, and logic. All three of them, we know they may have several values, low, high, 0, etc. But the units we will measure them, they are not compatible. Therefore, we need to normalize them so that to be compatible. And
I'm
we
sorry,
said
Professor.
that
I hear a noise. I hear a noise. Somebody makes noise. Okay, continue.
okay. Do you hear now the noise?
Not yet. No.
No. Okay. So the quantification is a mathematical process that could transform any measured values into a dimensionless values of a certain range, usually between 0 and 1. And here is an example I gave you last time that we tried here in a research program to estimate the possibility of the ignition of the fire, the forest fire. And we had these 4 parameters measured over the same area. You see here 4 pieces of that area. This square could be 1,000 meter by 1,000 meter, each of these 4 squares. And having, for instance, the grass, like the fuel model, the moisture of the grass, and the elevation and the orientation of the Earth surface, then all these 4 parameters, they measured in different units. Therefore, to make them compatible, we do the normalization. And you see all of them, they have a value between 0 and 1. And to show you how this normalization process goes on, I pick up the elevation that everybody knows what it is. For instance, this piece of land has 150 meters, this one 156, 154, and 170. And to normalize these values, what we do, we subtract from each elevation value the minimum, which in this particular case is 150. We divide the difference between maximum and minimum. Maximum is 170 minus 150. And we transform these values into 0, 0.3, 0.2, and 1 according to this formula here. It's a very easy process. And because the units in the numerator and denominator are the same, then the normalized value, these values here, they have no dimensions. So they make them compatible. Then we talk about the coordinate systems because we want to end up with a mind coordinate system. We talk about that one-dimensional system is just one line, and we need one number to put a point on the line. And in the plane, we have two axes perpendicular, x and y, and we need two numbers to put a point on this system. In the three-dimensional, we have three axes mutually perpendicular, and we need three numbers to put the position of a point in the three-dimensional space. And we have another situation like a sphere. On the surface of the sphere, we have the longitude and latitude, lambda and phi, and if we want to have a third parameter like the elevation, okay, to make it three-dimensional. Then we said that coordinate system with three-dimensional coordinate systems, we may have like the geometric one we already said about. Then we have the color space, for instance, with three primary colors here, the axis, red, green, blue, that any point here with three values RGB defines a different color hue. This is the color space. In the same way, we may have the mind space with three values of desire, anger, and logic. It's a three-dimensional space, quite similar to the geometric and the color space. Now, if we go into the mind three-dimensional coordinate system, you see here is the desire axis, here is the anger axis, and here is the logic axis. Any mind state, MS, is defined by three values, L, D, A. L is this distance from here to there, or from 0 to this point. D is the distance from here to there, and A is from here to there, desire, anger, logic. Logic, desire, anger here, three values. Okay, we said we can quantize these values, normalize them, so there is a meaning how to work in this three-dimensional space. Now, if we take the balancing logic between desire and anger is the diagonal of this parallelogram here, LDA, and pick up the LDA and put it right here, it will come up to this point. Then the difference between the current logic and the balancing logic give us the human error that you can see here. L minus LDA is the human error. So we can express mathematically what human error is. And of course, these axes are perpendicular, so the LDA is calculated with the Pythagoras theorem, as you see here. Now, if we go to the model of external balance, where the mid-space of Aristotle's virtue actually models the human error, as we will see. According to Aristotle, virtue is a mid-space, not a mean, it's a space, and is found between two extreme positions or vices. The one such position is for underestimation or defect of the virtue, and the other is for overestimation or excess of the virtue. The example Aristotle gives us is about fears and courage. Virtue is a mid-space in the Nicomachean Ethics. We can interpret that courage is a mid-space between the coward and the provocative. Similarly, we may say that thrifty as a virtue is a mid-space between stinginess and overspending, and so forth. That's the definition of virtue by Aristotle. And the entire book of Nicomachean Ethics actually is trying to establish this mid-space, talks about this. And the whole Greek philosophy, all the philosophers, they use this model in all their developments. Is the origin, they may follow a different direction, but their origin is there, is the internal and external balance. Mid-space of virtue is when the human error is less than a threshold limit, and it is, we may say that this mid-space is the acceptably correct area, that we are doing correct. The human error is below a limit. Also, virtue is something that anybody at any moment could try to be virtuous. Okay, it never is late. We said about the rules for governing the functioning of nature objects that they have tolerance limits and exceptions. And we see here that actually this is these are the mid-space defines the tolerance limits. Also, how we define this mid-space area, we have to understand that we have to go into the human dimensions, how we do it. And this is done by wider consensus, like the democratic procedures do. And in this way, we found the democratic procedures they are, but the voters must be also virtuous. We must have internal and external balance in order to democracy to work. We gave this example how we define this limit with this graph, with this picture actually, how the horse will raise the foot to pass the obstacle, and we have the lower and upper limit here, and we said that below the lower limit we have error with negative sign, and this is the deficiency to estimate virtue, and over the upper limit we have error with positive sign, and this is the excessive estimation of the virtue. And inside here we have the acceptably correct. If we take the average of all the correct passes through the obstacle, then we may have the absolute correct point or the mean value. Now, if we go into the mathematical modeling, what modeling means is to simulate something that an event that happens. And if we do that with mathematics, we use, as we said, functions, parameters, and relationships between the parameters. But we have to take into consideration another thing. This is B here, you see, that if some parameters, they are measured, then they carry a random error. So we have to say that mathematical modeling is composed of two parts, the functional part and the stochastic part. The stochastic part is necessary to estimate the accuracy of the parameters and the results we get when we use them. And it has to do with, it is defined, the stochastic part, with the distribution of the random components of the parameters. A parameter component or variable is random when we do not know the exact magnitude of each value unless we determine it in a specific way, such as through measurement, experiment, etc. If we try to measure, for instance, a large distance with a tape, no matter how many times we measure it, the next time we try to measure it, we don't know what the outcome will be unless we perform the measurement. That means because there are random, this length has random components. The stochastic part of the parameter usually is defined by its mean value, mi, internationally the Greek mi, and its variance sigma square, or its standard deviation, which is the square root of sigma square or sigma, plus or minus sigma. Either we have sigma or sigma square, we can get, if we have the one, we get the other. Now, probability theory is the one that develops the basis that statistics is based on. And I want to say here that probability theory is based on experiments with random events that we use in probability the entire population to draw conclusions, while in statistics we draw similar conclusions using a subset of the population or a sample. For instance, by measuring a length, as I said before, you can measure it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, infinite times. The population of measurements is infinity. But if you use statistics, you can estimate the mean value of the population and the variance using just a sample, a subset of the population, like two measurements or 3 measurements or 4 and so forth. Of course, if you increase the number of measurements, you increase the accuracy, as we will see. And there are, though, some random events that they have a definite population, like to throw a dice. For instance, the population is 6 values, one of the 6 values. Probability actually is defined as a fraction with numerator all the favored events of a random experiment, and denominator all the events of the random experiment. And here is given with the 2 dices when you throw and you want to have these values. Here, that the probability is calculated as 11.11%. Statistics, therefore, estimate the population mean value and variance using a subset of the sample of the population, and uses statistical testing to figure out whether the estimated values have or they have not significant difference from the population values. So we have in statistics a sample, we calculate the mean values and variances and covariances you will see later on. And also we have statistical testing to see if these values are according to they don't have significant difference with the population values. Here is an example. I ran a similar experiment in US with horses, but these values here are made up. They are not from real horses. Actually, at that time, we tried to estimate the weight of an animal for a zoo from a distance by measuring with photographs 2 distances. One distance is from the tip of the nose to the beginning of the tail, and the other distance is from the ground to the belly. And the length from the tip nose to the beginning of the tail, we call it X, and these are the values of the 5 horses. And the height is the Y you see here. Then we want to calculate the mean value X, mean value Y, the standard deviation X or Y, and the correlation. Here is the mean value. All of us, we know how it's calculated. Okay, it's 13.45 as the sum of the values divided by 5, how many horses we have. And this is the mean value. The variance or the standard deviation, okay, is the square root of the variance, is given by this formula here, and is calculated like 5.8 centimeters or 0.058 meters. Now, if we want to, this is the accuracy of each one of these measurements, of the X measurements, is 5.8 centimeters. Now, if we want to calculate the accuracy of the mean, we divide that value with the 0.5 values here, and we get a better estimate of the mean, okay, which is a better accuracy, 2.6 centimeters. Similarly, we calculate the value of the mean value of the Y, the sigma of the Y, and also the correlation between these 2 values. That means if the X depends on the Y and the Y on the X. And it's obvious if a horse has a big length, has also a big height. And this correlation comes up to 93% in this made up data. Okay, they are not real data, just for illustration. These are the basic statistic formulas. If someone knows these formulas, knows, a great deal of statistics. This is the average, the formula of the variance, and the formula of the covariance here. And this is the formula of the correlation. So covariance is necessary to calculate the correlation, as you see with this formula here. Now, if we try to plot these values, X values actually we take here to plot, what we do is we take a step like 0.05 meters and see how many values are within this step. We start with the value 2.60, which is the minimum value here. Okay, and between 2.560 and 2.65, we have just one value. Okay, we put this to make the histogram, we put here 1. And then between 65 and 270, I made it 71. Okay, just I took a little bit more to have 3 values over here. Okay, and then we have one more value. And if we take, this is the histogram with the colors you see here, the blue and the green colors. If we take the middle of this point and the middle of this over here, and then we can draw this red line called polygon. And polygon alone is like this, if we take the histogram away. And then we can fit this polygon into a simple mathematical function, like this is the Gaussian function called, which has only 2 parameters, is the sigma and the me over here. All right, let me also be able to see my, okay. And the me here on this exponent. Although this formula seems very complicated, with the computers we have today, we have no problem to do any calculations with it. So from this Gauss formula actually could model this type of distribution of values of the polygon of this type of values. Of course, distributions of this type to form such polygon and fit to the Gaussian function you see here. We have several random variables. They follow this normal distribution. Therefore, not all the variables or random variables, they follow the normal distribution. They may follow a different distribution. We have many distributions. Okay, we talk about just the normal. And also, besides the normal distribution, we have the standard normal distribution given by this formula, which uses mean value 0 and variance 1. If we know the standard normal distribution, we can get the X distribution, okay, with this transformation formula here. The Z, if we know the Z, we can calculate the X. And if we know the X, we can calculate the Z. Therefore, before the computers, okay, we used to take these values Z from tables, and we use this standard normal distribution to formulate the tables and work with any kind of me and sigma normal distribution. But today, this is not the case, although even today we use this formula, okay? In the algorithms that they work with the normal distribution, they use this formula here. Now, in the first lesson, we talk about how we use mathematics to formulate philosophical structures. And here we have the error we said in the x-axis, and the limits for the mid-space of virtue right here. And we want to see how to define the lower and upper limit of the mid-space of virtue. We said that any human action has, any correct action has also error. And correct and error, they coexist in any human action. And we said that this happens because human structure of the brain is based on neurons, and neurons, they are not absolutely correct. We said also if X is human error and Y is the acceptable correct, then these are inverse proportional to each other, and we defined this function to express this inverse proportional situation. If we have large value on X, we have small value for Y. If we have large value for Y, we have small value for the X. We said then that in the boundaries here between correct and error, we acceptable correct and error, X and Y must have the same value. So if we want to define these boundary points, we have to put in this formula Y equal the X. So we have this equation, and if we solve that, we get X is equal plus or minus 1. Now, having defined these boundaries of the acceptable correct or the mid-space of virtue or plus or minus 1, that of course looks like a scale factor or a unit of measurement actually in this error axis we put here. But also if we try to go back into the standard normal distribution, we will see that over there we have 0 mean value and 1 variance, 1 standard deviation. Okay, and if we go further, okay, this is the standard normal distribution down here, and we have the z-axis. In any location of the z, remember that is if we know the x, like in this actually normal distribution, then we can calculate with this formula the z. So either we talk about x or z is the same thing. Therefore, if we know the z error for human performance error, then on this axis f of z, we see how many people they have this z error. Okay, this gives us the number of the people. Of course, it talks about relative frequency. That means this value is the number of the people they have this error divided by the total population. That means relative frequency. And we may say that this is the way nature has designed the human mind to perform. Okay. And this error distribution, therefore, is a diagram for an ideal society with human error on the x and the number of individuals on the z-axis that you can see here. According to Aristotle, Aristotle also talks about the mid-space of virtue and says to mesu an I stochastiki means the range of the mid-space is stochastic. He uses first time the word stochastic that later in statistics defines the stochastic process. And of course, what I want to, ending up today's lecture, I want to say that I made the assumption that the human error follows the standard normal distribution, but this is something to be proven. That it needs scientific research. It is to tell the scientists to search and find out if actually is the normal distribution that follows or some other distribution. Okay, but the developments we are going to do here using the standard normal distribution would be the same as similar by working with other type of distributions. And at this point, I'm going to, I finish today's lecture, and I want to ask you if you have any questions related to the lecture before we go to the laboratory, to Helen. Are there any questions? Okay. Dimitris.
You may open your microphones, please, and make a question if you have.
John, I have an observation, and I'm wondering how it is that you can have an understanding of virtue, and how, in fact, you can use virtue as a thing rather than as a behavior. The issue that you've got is when you try to create an argument based on the use of a verb or an adverb, which you've now reified as a noun, I question whether or not you can actually have virtue. You can certainly behave virtuously, but what is virtue?
This is the way that Aristotle approaches virtue, and he tries also to quantize by, for instance, discussing the issue how we define these limits, and says that Milon was an athlete, okay, he eats more than some other people, and so everybody has a different location to say where are these limits. And
yes, but it's difficult to have a limit for something that doesn't exist. Virtue doesn't exist. Virtue is a behavior. It's an idea. Now, this is the problem with Aristotle. Virtue, he's created a noun or a thing out of an idea, a concept. And these are fundamental problems with the theory or Aristotelian theory. You've moved away from Plato into Aristotle. And of course, Aristotle's arguments are never correct. They have never been correct in history.
Yeah, you are right on that, but the way I understand, because there are several ways to understand these people, is that all of them, they start of the same origin. They follow different directions, but the origin is the same, and it's this internal balance and external balance. External balance has to do with the panmetron ariston, for instance, which means not to be deficit, not excess. Okay, that means metron ariston. Everybody, all the philosophers, they follow that. And this is defines the midway of virtue. Yes, it is an ideal, but as an ideal, influences human behavior. And we're talking about here.
Well, the ideals don't influence human behavior. The ideals are there as an example of behaving virtuously. But to say that virtue exists is a problem for your argument. You can't prove the existence of virtue. It's if you're saying it's a metric or a way of measuring someone's or a person's behavior, then that's a completely different discussion.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
can't be a midpoint of virtue because you can't assign a quality to virtue.
Probably we probably need to use a different term. But I'm talking about human error. Okay.
Well, you know, this is subjectivity. When you say that there's human error, what
Yeah.
you're saying is we would prefer someone to, or you might prefer, or I might prefer someone to behave in a different way, in a virtuous way. Okay, I understand that, but there you're using a way as the process of where you're going to, not virtue is where you end up. You don't end up with virtue, you end up with virtuous behavior. It's a completely different discussion.
Well,
So trying to find trying to find the midpoint of virtue is like trying to say, I'm trying to find the midpoint of red.
this is something, as I said, has to do with the external balance, means human
Okay,
actions.
so John, I understand the issue with external balance, and it's certainly, you know, favorable or preferable behavior. But where I think your discussion, what your discussion's founded on, is Aristotelian concepts rather than Platonic ideas.
Well, may I say something?
Sure.
I agree with Jeremy. I agree too much with Jeremy because Socrates proved that the concept of equality, justice, the idea of freedom are not beings that exist in the material world. And since they do not exist in the sensible world, we should not perceive that them, but because we perceive them means that they exist in another imaginary world and world of ideas. This is the point that Geronimo said, that it's an idea. Of course it is. And or the two words of sensation and the word of conceivable. That's the point. It's imaginary. It's a concept of quality.
It's a concept.
The concept, is it, Geronimo?
Yes, that's correct. And you know, the notion of something like democracy or freedom are not real things. There is no democracy. You know, it's an ideal. It's an ideal. It's a concept that we try to attain.
Or the justice.
Well, justice, the same thing. Or matter, you could say the same thing.
Yeah.
There is no matter. It's an idea. And so when you try to say and establish through mathematical terms, and I like that, the way that you do that, but you're not actually establishing a midpoint of virtue or the way that people should behave. You can't establish that. You can't find the midpoint or the best way of people behaving. You can only draw the conclusion that you either do or do not agree with that party or that person's behavior. All right, so that becomes subjective. You know, I think it's very difficult to try and create a case that exists to say there's a science relating to virtue. There is none. You can't create one concept from another concept. It's what's known as a fallacy. This is a defect in logic.
Well, let's have also the next lessons, because we handle many of the issues we discuss now in the next lessons
Yes.
and see how to work with it. But I need, I mean, I did this effort trying to combine what I have as, you know, philosophical views and what I've read. I haven't read much in philosophy, but I have some views, together with what I worked as a surveyor or geomatic engineer. And I view things in a totally different way. Because I work with mathematical modeling. Again, we have concepts, we have all of this, and then we try to put this to function and work and get results. And the results I try to get here is to establish some basis for solving the human society problems. But first, I have to see how the society functions today and see how we can use mathematics to get this functioning. And then these mathematics, they use the real world and the ideal world, and try to see where is the ideal and where is the real, and how we can get to the ideal. This is the whole concept of the course.
Well, I accept what you're saying there, and it's you know, it's a noble effort you're making. But if you wanted to really investigate the, you know, and understand, you know, these concepts, you're probably better to do it from a Platonic point of view, wherein there is a denial of the external world, and that all things are idealistic. Idealism is the overarching viewpoint of Plato. And so you can actually create a world, but it's based on not society, but on yourself. And it's the notion of the self. Whereas with Aristotle, you're stuck in an external world because you actually accept there is an external world. It can't be. There is nothing. There are no solutions in an external world. There is only the self that can solve these issues.
Yeah, we'll probably talk about that in the next lecture.
Okay.
Yeah, I have some new material there.
Yeah.
Okay.
All I'm saying to you is your standpoint, your base, your foundation should be from idealism, not pluralism, which is the Aristotle's viewpoint. Aristotle assumes there is more than the self. Plato knows there is only the self. And from that, you can understand what appears to be the seeming of an external world. I think this is very important. If you can either agree or disagree with the two philosophies, but if you're not using each one independently to solve these issues that you see, you believe exist in an order or a social atmosphere, then it's just a rabbit hole.
Well, Jerome, look, I appreciate your contribution in this course, because you are exactly from a point that I would like to have someone to discuss. Okay, you see also that this is my weak point in this lectures. All right, but let's do this discussion at the end in the last lecture. Okay, have a lecture and talk about it. Have the way I see things, and I have developed this material, and make this talk at the end and see.
At the end. Okay.
Okay. Well, I can accept what you're saying and what you'd like to do, but I think you've got to have a balance between the enterprise that you're getting into, and just to essentially take the Aristotelian view is going to not lead you anywhere. This is a problem. It's going to be a problem. You will not get a result that is going to be helpful. You're only going to create more concepts facts.
Well, let's make this discussion at the end. Okay.
Okay, shall we go through the laboratory?
Yes, yes.
Okay. May I start first?
Yes.
Helen,
Share my
Helen,
screen.
have you any question?
Can I share the screen? Can I share the screen now?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yes.
Show
Okay.
it, show it.
Okay. Okay. Can you see my slide, my first slide?
Yes.
And
Yes.
can you see my second slide?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. All right, I'll go back to the first. The discussion that I just heard was very, very interesting for me. I grapple with the principles in much more intensively than you do, Jerome and John and General Voggolis. You are far in advance of myself when it comes to Platonic and Aristotelian concepts. I do remember taking a course in my undergraduate college career and remembering my professor talking about Plato. And I remember that it was exactly what you were talking about, Jerome. These kind of principles that do not exist in the real world. And I also remember Aristotle, the discussion about Aristotle and how he is attempting, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but how I remember, he's attempting to understand human involvement in the society and how the human can live in a more virtuous way. I think, but let me start. Why did I pick the metamorphosis? And I picked metamorphosis mainly to help myself understand Plato and Aristotle, because in the metamorphosis, we see this huge battle between the self and the society. Yes, we also see it in Antigone, and we see that the result in Antigone is her death. There is no reconciling between her personal convictions and society's convictions. In The Beggar, we see a different kind of hero. We see the beggar who eventually is transformed into a proper functioning person in that society, which is not a virtuous society, but he does it through the means of a virtuous woman, the Olga. And there's much more to be said about that transition, but I see those two works as diverging. Now, in the Metamorphosis, we have an absurdist. We have a work of absurdism. We have an individual, Gregor Samsa, who has been caught up. He has been made immobile. He has been made useless by the society through possibly no fault of his own. We'll talk about that. But I think mainly because of the circumstances of the society that he lives in, he's quite unable to grapple, to handle that situation. So that's kind of an introduction to the reasons I picked the Metamorphosis. Just my own quick understanding of this work, and really, please, anybody wants to speak at any time, jump in. Thank you. The human condition is well beyond tragic or depressed, according to Kafka. It is absurd, it is meaningless. He believes, and I think in some ways this is maybe Platonic, but I'm not sure, relates to Plato. Kafka believes that the whole human race is the product of one of God's bad days. There is no meaning to make sense of our lives, and his understanding of this fatalism is based on his environment, his times. We can say that what I'm trying to say here is that in Kafka's literature, there's not a fatalism. There is a constant attempt to reach a virtuous mid-space, a place where a human can remain true to his ideals, but also can function within the society. I'm not sure I'm using the right terms. I'll go on. Magical realism, allegorical tale, touches on the most central theme of everyone, struggling to find and express one's own identity in a world of ever-present, all-consuming obligations, pressures to conform. In other words, a defective society. We are reminded that the human condition is the mythical figure of Sisyphus, doomed for eternity to roll a rock up the hill, only for it to fall down again. A pointless struggle, in other words. Only two responses are possible: suicide or rebellion. So in Kafka's literature, there are these two possibilities. The main themes of alienation, emotional detachment, absurdity of the human condition. It is the idea that the world is absurd, that the norms of society and the events that happen in the world are arbitrary. So we have a very, obviously, a very negative view of the world, according to Kafka, who, by the way, had read all of the classic Greek philosophers and many others as well during his time. And so there is that to be said about him. I don't need to go through this. You already know one of the great lines of literature: he awoke one morning from uneasy dreams and found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. What we can, obviously, there have been hundreds and hundreds of essays written about what exactly Kafka meant. And from what we understand from his own writings is that the insect represents, the animal represents the human animal. In other words, a human that is caught, that is confined and controlled by his animal impulses as well. I believe that, I believe that Plato was also very interested in the animal world, as well as Aristotle, but I'm not sure about that. Let me go on. Okay, so these are my own themes. They're based on other people's writings, but these are the main themes that I want to convey. And maybe we can also see how they correlate, how they connect to Plato and Aristotle. He has been transformed, or maybe we should say, I'm changing my mind as I speak. He has transformed himself into the lowest of creatures. But interestingly enough, as we see with the other characters in the story, he's actually more human in his thoughts and feelings than the other characters. Kafka seems to be making an observation about the nature of humanity, that human beings are often more motivated by selfish desires. This is what we're talking about, their own well-being rather than love and service, the virtues versus the unvirtues. That said, he made mistakes, wrong decisions. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a moment. He's very real. He's a very real monster in the story. We find ourselves in great sympathy, but we also find ourselves in confusion over what that actually means. It's so horrible to conceive of this happening to a human being. But we're even more horrified to see what happens to his family and the way they view him and the way they treat him. It would appear that unconditional love of a parent towards the child is nullified and voided when that child is no longer useful. And I think this would be a key word for myself. This is my own interpretation, the usefulness of a human being. And we could also say the usefulness of an animal. Is this view more prevalent in our industrialized modern society than in the past? Just a question that I would ask. Notice that the metamorphosis in other characters as well. So we see a metamorphosis, a transformation, not only in Gregor, but also in his family members. How does that correlate? How do we see their behaviors as cause and effect? Kind of an interesting thing that I was thinking about because of the work that Dr. Hatzopoulos is presenting. Or is it a classic son versus father Freudian analysis? I think most of us understand today in the world of literature that Freudian analysis is fun, it's interesting, but has really not held up well in the 21st century. So unless you're interested in Hitchcock's films or kind of having fun with it, I really don't think this is a Freudian story, but you may want to disagree. Okay. So now here I'm putting out, I'm writing, putting into my chart what I think relates more to the internal balance of Plato, to the external, and then to the consequences. And I can allow you to read this and then to correct me or to say you got it or not. There is a self-awareness, obviously. When he wakes up, he is aware suddenly, overnight, that he is incapable. Let's just use that term, incapable of functioning any longer in the society, not only because of the way he looks or the way he thinks he looks. We find out later that other people see him that way as well. It's interesting, this self-concept of what physically we look like versus what other people think we look like, and how that relates to our utility, our value in the society. Okay, he is still very human, whether or not we accept that he has become the lowest of the animal world. He has a self-awareness of his predicament. I think self-awareness is also part of Plato's ideas, and correct me again, because you are much more familiar with Plato's work than I am. He is able to assess his situation. He has logic. In other words, he's still logically understanding that he is incapable of function. He's obedient, and that I know is one of Plato's virtues, the virtue of obedience. He's still obedient. He's still obedient in the fact that he's trying so hard to come out of this state that he's in, to emerge from this insect and go back to where he was, supporting the family, being a useful person in the company that he worked for. He is still very much trying to show obedience. He is moderate. He's considerate of others, including the manager. still very considerate. He doesn't want anyone to see him. He's trying hard to, he's actually hoping that his sister will intervene while he's trying to grapple with his inability to be of any use. He's faithful to his family and workplace, and he initially is choosing the society over himself. Possibly this maybe should go over here into the external balance, because this shows that he is still tied, and it's still very important to him to be connected to the society, to the family. Well, I mean, I can stop here and maybe you can correct me, or I can finish up and then we can talk about this. But interrupt me at any point. Okay, external balance, faithful to family and country. He served in the military. He has been an obedient son to his family, his parents. He has worked hard to help support the family. He empathizes with his family. He's very sympathetic with his mother's illness. He's sympathetic with his father's hypocritical loss of finances. We find out later that that's a lie, but he is empathetic to his father. He considers solutions. He displays courage, patience, faith, and he chooses society over himself. I think at the end, though, he makes the decision to sacrifice himself for the good of the society. And the consequences, of course, we know: an inability to communicate, unable to leave. He's unable to leave a tormenting workplace. After his transformation, he is forced to reassert his focus to himself, and society abandons him, leading to his death. Once he begins to reassert the importance to survival, to himself, society, his family abandons him, leading to his death. Okay. How do we make sense of this, John, with your conceptual framework with Plato and Aristotle? Can you help me now?
Your analysis about Gregor, I think, is excellent. I mean, it covers everything based on the story and the internal and external balance. But I mean, I have nothing to say more.
But if Aristotle suggests that we have the ability to create a better life for ourselves by living within those boundaries, then how does Kafka resolve? Kafka would say, no, it's not possible. I mean, we know that based on Kafka's life and his writing, we're seeing a world, this European world, on the verge of catastrophe. We're right, pre-World War I. We're seeing the world going through tremendous change in the early 20th century. And we see a disconnectedness between the old and the new, and how people are attempting to salvage their humanity or what they knew before with the new world. We see that very clearly in the character of Greta, his sister, and somewhat the father figure. Greta changes from an obedient child, a loving sister who really is the only one in the family who is attempting to help her brother. And we see her at the end, she's become a modern woman. She's the modern woman who is capable of going out into the world, finding a job, finding a husband, using her own physicality to do so. And we see the failure of the old world, the failure of the old world of Gregor, who is obedient, faithful to the values, the traditional values of the family, even to the point where he sacrifices himself. So I'm not sure how all of this works with this kind of world on the edge of collapse, and it did collapse.
This is exactly what is happening today, and that's the reason we have to try to find a different way, because the society at that time was functioning, I would say, just believing that money is the God. And everything, you know, is, for instance, Gregor, he liked to do wood sculptures, and he ended up to be a salesman who he didn't like, but that was the way to support the family, and that's a sickness of the society, not to be able to accommodate the talent of the people, and just the money are the ones is the thing that governs everything and all the human actions. The finances. Okay, we have to think this is the sickness of the society. And
do you agree? Do you agree? Anybody can answer this question. Do you agree with what Kafka has said, that the solution is either to rebel or to self-destruct? For humanity to rebel or self-destruct, are those the only two options? And what would Aristotle or Plato, how would they conceive of that?
I think.
Well, if I may say something, Eleni, thank you.
Please, Jerome, thank you.
For your ideas on this, because you've certainly added a lot of depth and quality to the understanding of this work. I wasn't familiar with it before I had read it, and I didn't actually get that much out of it until I saw your assessment. So thank you. I think this is actually an interesting point in the whole discussion that we've had before, because here we're seeing the outplay of Aristotelian world, the viewpoint that Aristotle purportedly suggested was the way that we should live, whereas opposed to the Platonic viewpoint of self first rather than others. So it's a very important point in I suppose our discussion. The Aristotelian world doesn't work because it's based on the notion that there is something more than the self. Whereas in Platonic idealism, it is the self that comes first, and all other things are relevant to the self only. So what we're seeing in the world of the destruction or the mayhem, it is, from a Platonic point of view, is simply an illusion. And we should start as a group and as an individual, start to live more in an idealistic world, and that is the world of ourselves, rather than be supportive to other people. But the real the real downfall of the family, if you're using that as an analogy for society in this book, is that they do not practice the principle of xenia, and there is no kindness in them. It's all superficial because they're all playing out their own parts of a family. I did like the comment that you made about the Freudian aspect, and I think you're probably working towards the Oedipal complex, particularly between father and son. And I thought that was actually, now that I read that, I actually think that adds a lot of weight to this book, all the work. So thank you for that. I can see that Oedipal scenario playing out. It's always been the background to society and culture, the Oedipus dynamic, if I can put it that way. But anyway, look, thank you for that. That's good. I hope you appreciate what I'm trying to put forward here. The answer is not in trying to find how people should be virtuous. It's in changing our worldview to a Platonic world, case. So I'll just leave that with you.
Well, Jerome, may I ask you quickly? I don't know about our time, but based on my limited understanding, and you know that I'm not as well read on ancient Greek philosophy as you all are, but based on your understanding, how would Gregor Samsa have survived and lived a more contented life if he subscribed more to the Platonic form of existence? How would he have dealt with his life? I'm just curious. What do you think?
Well, quite simply, he would have had a fulfilled, happy life if he had become an artist. Mm-hmm. That's what he wanted to do. That's what his propensity was, his creativity, and yet he was, became an insurance salesman. And so that was in fact his downfall. He tried to serve the Aristotelian world and he failed. And he was rejected because of that.
So you place very little importance on the social family relationships. In other words, Gregor sacrificing his idealistic goal of becoming an artist to supporting his family, to keep them from being.
Here again, you're confounding the notion that his family would not have been better off, or may have been better off, if he was a salesman. Yes, clearly he would have been better off and happier. His family would have made their own way. So rather than him towing the family line or the societal, pressure. And so this is where, the evaluation of self can only come through the Platonic method. And the Aristotelian viewpoint is really the enemy of the individual.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
May I go?
Yes, Dimitris.
Congratulations to Eleni on choosing Kalfa, who became well known as the greatest writer of the 20th century, who described in detail the decomposition of the inner man. The Metamorphosis is said to be one of Kafka's best works of literature. It shows the difficulties of living in a modern society and the struggle for acceptance of others, one in time of need, with an internal balance. In this novel, Kafka directly reflects upon many of the negative aspects of his personal life, both mentally and physically. The relationship between Gregor and his father is in many ways similar to Franz and his father Hermann. The metamorphosis also shows resemblance to some of Kafka's diary entries that depict him imagining his own extinctions by dozens of elaborated methods. This paper will look into the text to show how this is a story about the author's personal life portrayed through his dream-like fantasies, an external balance of thoughts and imaginary ideas. Kafka grew up in a financially secure Jewish family in Prague. He spoke German and was neither a Czech nor German due to his Jewish upbringing. He lived in his life in the shadow of his dominating father under constant pressure to take over the family business. Kafka's father viewed Franz as a failure and disappointed of his writing because he wanted Franz to become a businessman like him. This obsession will waiting Franz to become a businessman led Hermann to beat his son. An action of an exaggerated balance showing how short-tempered he was. He continued making a hissing noise that annoyed Gregor when he chased Gregor back to his room. He kicked him in the back as he reached the door. Another event in which Gregor encountered violence from his father was when Mr. Sampson threw an apple at him and it logged in his back. It was an exaggerated external balance of behavior. When Kafka was a boy, his father abused him. Whenever Kafka desired with his father or told his father that he wanted to be a writer, not a shop owner, his father got very upset. In the book, Mr. Samsa displayed the violent temper from the very first encounter with the transformed Gregor. From this point, on the physical and mental condition of Gregor steadily decreased. The apple began to rot away, and he felt weakened and experienced more pain than usual. Gregor even lost his appetite. The feelings of seclusion and not being wanted entered Gregor's thoughts. He could tell that his sister did not care as much as he did when he first became a bug. These feelings could have been the same feelings of seclusion that Kalfa felt in his own life after abuse from his father.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful, wonderful summary.
Yes, I want to point out, Ellen, that in these lessons that we have to do is to prove when we have internal balance and when external.
Okay.
What causes and what is the result of the behaviors of the characters. This is the point that we have to dedicate the reason that causes every character to do error or not.
Thank you. Thank you for that important reminder. And thank you for bringing
That's all from me.
And for bringing up important other concepts, including.
We don't hear you, Ellen. Ellen, we don't hear you.
Sorry,
Go
sorry.
close to microphone. Open your microphone, Ellen.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me
Yes.
now? Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to say thank you so much for your summary. Thank you for bringing up some important points that, for example, suppressed anger. I may disagree with you on the importance of the father-son relationship in this story. I think there are other more important relationships and how they affect Gregor besides the father, although he's very important in Kafka's life as well as his characters. So thank you for that excellent summation. Okay, I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, Dimitri, you have the floor.
I can complete, and I have some more to say, but we have not much time. In the Metamorphosis, there are many signs of slow determination for Gregor. He gradually starts to lose his eyesight as he notices that he cannot even see across the road to the hospital. This is an internal balance with the willing of being in moving like a human being, and he understood that this reaction it's similar to the human being, but he has numerous of injuries, some of which he cannot explain and so on, like the pain of his side when he first woke up and so on. He had an apple locked in his back, which was left to rot. When his father threw it, when he went out of his room, he was cut by a piece of glass from a shattering alcohol bottle and was bleeding profusely when he tried to get into his room. This is emotion, an emotion, human emotion, and all feelings that an insect has. It's similar to the human being, and I think that this novel is one of the best, and that's why Kafka was the writer of 20th century. Thank you.
Many layers of meanings, many symbolic objects. Some people have commented. Some people have commented that that Samsa becomes a Christ-like figure. That and on. I mean, there's so much complexity in this novel. I'm glad you enjoyed it, General Voggolis. Thank you so much, and everyone. Next week, I've chosen.
Helen, really, you have chosen the best article you could choose, the best one. I have read Kafka in Ziki, we said, and Pyrgos. Have you ever read it? And this is it is true that
The castle. Oh, the castle.
he was the writer of the 20th century. I believe it. I believe it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's another wonderful work, The Castle. Jerome, if you want to tackle that one, that's another phenomenal read. You know who would really enjoy it is our missing member, Stella. Stella would, I think, would enjoy The Castle because Kafka talks about the legal system as a nihilistic, organic force of destruction. So I think Stella would like
it. Okay, Jerome, you may say something.
Okay, well, I actually got a lot out of this this discussion, and I shall be reading a lot more Kafka, I think. Interestingly, when I grew up, there was a copy of Kafka's works on in our library at home, but for some reason I never was attracted to it, but I certainly will be getting back to it. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. This is, you know, it's almost like ancient Greek literature. It's that good, and the message is probably still the same.
That's true.
Interesting. He was able to, I think, many creative people in the creative world have looked to Kafka to explain the rise of Nazism, actually, in the 1920s in Germany after the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Another kind of side note, very interesting side note. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hatzopoulos. You have the floor, and we shall close the lecture for tonight.
Okay. I'd like to thank you, all of you, for this wonderful discussion. And I think particularly the laboratory part is give us the chance to see things also in a different way. And maybe at the end, we will be able, at the end of this series of lessons, we will be able to manage to put all these things together: mathematics, philosophy, education, and literature, and use them as in a way to be able to work with current problems. And literature like this one is exactly pointing the current problems, the problems we have today. And we have to think how to work out to change direction, to have better basis, to have to see what's wrong and how to correct it. And I think this class will provide such a basis to find a better direction to move human society to move. Thank you again, and see you next Saturday.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll
Thank you.
meet on next Saturday at the same time. Good night. Good
Thank
morning
you.
for you, Jordan, in Australia. Okay,
Bye. Thank you.
I wish you to have a nice sleep because it's midnight now there.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's early. Thank you. All right.
okay. Bye-bye to everybody.
Jerome is going to get his coffee.
Okay.
Bye.
Have a lovely weekend. Okay.
You too. Thank you so
The
much.
same to
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Oh,